We are finishing up our sermon series this week on Grappling with God, where we've been dealing with the story of Jacob. It's not over. The story is actually not over, so we could take a few more weeks to do that. But we're gonna end it here, as I think it's great to end this story on a happy note with Esau and Jacob coming back together. Will you please pray with me? Dear Lord, may the words of my mouth and meditations upon all of our hearts be holy and acceptable in your sight, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Joy Davidson was born in 1915 in New York City. She was the daughter of well-educated Jewish parents who sought the best education for their daughter. In elementary school, she broke the IQ exam. Growing up, she could sight read a score of Chopin. She could memorize Shakespeare upon a first reading. Joy would earn a bachelor's degree from Hunter College and a master's degree from Columbia University. She wanted to be a writer. Now, Joy was definitely a product of the intellectual climate of the time. She became a communist and an atheist. She married a philanderer named Bill Gresham. She had 2 children, but endured numerous infidelities with Bill. And finally, she divorced Gresham. And she was 40 years old, obnoxious, divorced, Jewish atheist with 2 kids. Somewhere along the way, she began a correspondence with a 50-something professor from Oxford. He had written some amazing work on Christian apologetics. He himself had been an atheist, but came to faith in Jesus Christ, and perhaps that shared intellectual journey made him very compassionate to Joy Davidson. And they began a friendship via letters that were sent across the waters back and forth. Joy Davidson, thanks mostly in part to this relationship, this friendship that had been done through correspondence, came to know Jesus Christ herself as her Lord. She converted to Christianity. What was probably most surprising, though, is when she showed up in Oxford. Joy had come to start a new life, and she turned to her friend to help her. That friend was Clive Staple Lewis, or C.S. Lewis, the author of Mere Christianity, the Screwtape Letters, The Great Divorce, and the Chronicles of Narnia. Now, Lewis's friends there in Oxford were a little suspicious of Joy. J.R.R. Tolkien was especially concerned that Lewis was associating with this divorcee. Lewis, the dispassionate scholar, appreciated her friendship and enjoyed the intellectual sparring. In fact, he made a decision to marry Joy, purely to help her with immigration. It was a quiet civil ceremony on April 23, 1956. The arrangement was a secret from most, and the two continued to keep separate households. Then Joy got cancer. Her body was riddled with malignant tumors. And something changed in Lewis. He realized that there was more to this marriage than simple formality. There is a beautiful play called Shadowlands. There's also a movie called Shadowlands. Actually was Anthony Hopkins as C.S. Lewis and Deborah Winger as Joy Gresham. There's a wonderful scene where Lewis is talking about Joy's mortality, and then the raising of the children, an obvious question. What's going to happen to those 2 kids? Lewis is pondering what he should do, and his friend responds, I mean, it's not as if what, Harry? She's your friend, of course, but, well, she's not family. She's not my wife. Of course not. Of course not. It's impossible. It's unthinkable. How could Joy have been my wife? I'd have to love her, wouldn't I? I'd have to care more for her than for anyone else in the world. I'd have to be suffering the torments of the damned, the prospects of losing her. I'm sorry, Jack. I didn't know. Nor did I, Harry. Lewis finally realizes that he loves Joy. The two are eventually remarried in a Christian ceremony, and Joy's cancer goes into remission for 3 years. Now, Lewis will lose Joy, but for those 3 years, their life was filled with love and passion. C.S. Lewis wrote to a friend, "It's funny having at 59 the sort of happiness that most men have in their 20s. Thou hast kept the good wine until now." Now, what does this have to do with Jacob? Jacob's relationship to God was like Lewis's marriage of convenience. There was a formal relationship, promises were made, but there was no love, no passion, no real relationship. Jacob only wanted the birthright. He wanted the blessing. Jacob was going to do anything and everything to get it. He took advantage of his brother. He cheated his father. He ran away from home because his selfishness destroyed the family he wanted to possess. Jacob was self-sufficient. He was a hustler and a trickster. He made his fortune by hard work and cunning. He spent 20 years in his uncle's household taking advantage of his relative. Again, Jacob found himself on the run because of his focus on the blessing destroyed even those relationships. And now Jacob is at the end of his rope. He has nowhere to turn, and he decides that the only thing he can do is to go back to his brother Esau, who responds by sending 400 men his way. There's going to be a showdown. Jacob, desperate in this circumstance, he encounters the divine. We talked about it last week. Jacob wrestles with a man all night long who is God. He wants the blessing, and he's not going to relent until he receives it. And God wounds him. God dislocates Jacob's hip, and he now walks with a limp. God gives Jacob a new name, Israel, the one who strives, the one who's not going to let go of that blessing. But the blessing can only come, the blessing that Jacob desires and longs for and is willing to cheat and steal for, that blessing can only come when Jacob is humbled, when he relies more on God than himself, when the relationship becomes more than a matter of convenience, more than a transaction. C.S. Lewis himself once said, "Every story of conversion is a blessed defeat." It's a defeat. We can't rely upon ourselves. We do not come to God on our own terms. We must be willing to submit to God's will. However, it is a blessed defeat. We experience the joy, the love, God's amazing grace. For years, Jacob was surrounded by the things of God. He knew the promises, the covenant. He heard the stories of his grandfather Abraham and his father Isaac. However, only when that relationship convenience changes in his own heart does it truly matter. It makes a difference in his life. I wonder how many of us struggle with the same thing. We go to church, we read our Bibles, we say we're Christians, but does it matter? You should watch the surveys that come out from Gallup and Barna. It's pretty disappointing. They tell us that self-professed Christians don't look much different from our neighbors. Divorce is actually more common among born-again Christians than the general American public. Only 6% of evangelicals tithe. White evangelicals are most likely to be the people who object to a neighbor of another race. Why? We can't share the good news when we've never experienced it ourselves. Is this simply a marriage of convenience? Or is there something more? After his encounter with God on the banks of the Jabbok River, Jacob is new. He's different. He has been transformed. He speaks about God's providence. In that chapter that we read just moments ago, he talks about these children. These children have been given to me by God. God has dealt graciously with me. Now, this is not the same Jacob who was scheming about every sheep in Shekel. Moreover, remember Jacob was so concerned about the birthright, right? He calls Esau now my Lord. First thing he does when he shows up and Esau's there, he bows down 7 times. What you would do if you were if you were a conquered king and you were visiting the conqueror, 7 times he bows down before him. This is the man to whom he stole the birthright. And he's appearing in humility and humbling himself before him. Jacob, who was so concerned with the blessing, with that inheritance, all that money and all the things that were coming his way, he is now showering his brother with extravagant gifts. In fact, Esau's going, whoa, that's too, don't give me all this stuff. You don't need to do that. He goes, but my Lord, please find favor with me. Jacob, who was so cavalier about his relationship with his brother, now seeks reconciliation. Jacob is a transformed man. He's different. He's new now that God has got a hold of him. And that's probably where we should start, that reconciliation, that sense of rebuilding those relationships. Because I'm sure all of us, this is something we encounter every day. We have relationships in our families, at our work, in our schools, in the places where we go, where the relationships can become strained. Where we have this grudge that we've been holding on and nursing for years and years and years. Or maybe it's a word that has been spoken and it hurt us so much that we're not willing to talk about it. Because we have been transformed by Christ, we have an effort. We have an effort to make our relationships more than just a matter of convenience. We're here to lift up one another, to hold one another account, to be able to show the joy and the love, to sacrifice for each other. Now, I know one of the problems is what if you work so hard and the other person is not willing to reconcile? What if I've done everything I can? Well, that's unfortunate. Hearts will still be broken in this world. But as far as it comes to us, let us seek peace with one another. If it's dependent upon me, let us seek peace. We have an opportunity to show the love of Christ in a dramatic way. There are things afoot. God is moving in this world. There are great things to possibility to happen, but are we going to embrace it? Are we going to embrace the grace of God in Jesus Christ, the love of God in Jesus Christ? Are we willing to be hurt because we love one another? God has given us so much. God has given us so much. I just think of C.S. Lewis. 60 years he has been going on as a bachelor, his entire life. And finally to find love in the most unlikely of places. To know that sort of passion, incredible depth, even if it was for just a short time. We are invited to a relationship not just for a couple years, but for all eternity. We're invited into a relationship that'll be forever. One of joy and love and peace. It's an adventure that we share together. Grappling with God. It will humble us. but only then we will be able to receive the blessing. Amen.